Karen felt something crack inside her chest. The room was spinning slightly, and she realized she was holding her breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but her voice was too quiet for anyone to hear over the shifting and murmuring of the crowd. "You know what the really sad part is?" Martha continued, and now there were tears in her voice. "We actually used to admire you. You cared about this place. You made it beautiful. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that a neighborhood isn't just houses and lawns. It's people." Karen looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors she'd cited, residents she'd corrected, people she'd reduced to violations and infractions. When had she stopped seeing them as human beings? "The meeting is adjourned," she said suddenly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "Karen, wait," someone called out, but she was already heading for the exit. Outside in the parking lot, Karen sat in her car and cried for the first time in years. Real, ugly, devastating sobs that shook her entire body. She'd built her identity around being right, around being in control, around being the person who held everything together. But what good was perfect compliance if it came at the cost of basic human decency? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Middleton, this is Sarah Chen. Mom wanted you to know that if you need someone to talk to, our door is open." Even after the gnome citation, Karen stared at the message, then looked back at the community center where people were still filing out, talking in small groups, processing what had just happened. She had a choice to make. She could double down, retreat into her regulations and righteousness, continue being the neighborhood's iron-fisted enforcer, or she could figure out how to be Karen Middleton the person, not just Karen Middleton the HOA president. The question that would haunt her all night was simple. After 3 years of being the rule book, did she remember how to be human? And in the morning, she'd have to decide whether it was too late to find out. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay calm," called out Captain Rodriguez as he and his team rounded the corner of the Henderson house, full gear and axes ready for whatever emergency had been reported. Karen's eyes widened in absolute horror. She recognized every face under those helmets. These were the same firefighters who'd attended the annual HOA barbecue just last month, where she'd lectured them about proper parking protocol for emergency vehicles. Tommy Morrison, the youngest one, was trying very hard not to smile. "This is not what it looks like," Karen shouted, clutching her juice glass like a lifeline. "I was conducting an official inspection of this clearly non-compliant water feature." Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances with his crew. "Mrs. Middleton, we received a call about someone drowning in a backyard pool." "Drowning? I am not drowning. I am stuck." Karen's voice pitched higher with each word. "And it's a jacuzzi, not a pool. Though clearly not a regulation-compliant jacuzzi, I might add." Fire Truck 19's pump operator, Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, Karen realized with fresh mortification, was now openly grinning. "Mom's going to love this," she whispered to Tommy, not quite quietly enough. "We're going to throw you a line, Mrs. Middleton," Captain Rodriguez called out, all professional courtesy despite the absurd situation. "Just grab on and we'll pull you out." "Absolutely not," Karen snapped. "I am perfectly capable of." She attempted to boost herself up on the jacuzzi's edge, but her hand slipped on the alder-covered surface, sending her splashing back down. A small wave of green water sloshed over the side. Tommy Morrison couldn't hold back his laughter anymore. "Sorry, Mrs. Middleton, but you've got pond weed in your hair." Karen reached up and felt the slimy vegetation draped across her head like a bizarre fascinator. Her perfectly controlled world was crumbling, one humiliating detail at a time. But Karen Middleton hadn't become HOA president by backing down from adversity. "Fine," she declared with as much dignity as someone standing in swamp water could muster. "But I want it on record that this entire situation is the direct result of the Hendersons' flagrant violation of multiple HOA regulations. This jacuzzi is a health hazard and a neighborhood eyesore." As the firefighters worked to extract her from her predicament, Karen's mind was already racing ahead. This debacle would spread through Willow Creek Estates faster than a wildfire. By evening, she'd be the laughingstock of the entire community. Her authority, her carefully cultivated image of unshakable competence, it would all be destroyed, unless she took control of the narrative first. Captain Rodriguez, she said as they hauled her onto solid ground, pond weeds still draped artistically across her shoulders. I trust this incident will be handled with the utmost discretion. Well, Mrs. Middleton, the captain replied with barely concealed amusement, we do have to file a report. Karen's blood ran cold. A public record of her humiliation. Unacceptable. But as she stood there, dripping and determined, she realized something else. She'd just discovered the perfect ammunition to finally bring down the Hendersons once and for all. Karen Middleton adjusted her oversized sun hat and surveyed her kingdom, Willow Creek Estates, with the satisfaction of a general reviewing her troops. As HOA president for 3 consecutive terms, she transformed this once chaotic neighborhood into a monument to order and compliance. Every lawn measured exactly 2.5 inches. Every mailbox gleamed regulation black, and every homeowner knew better than to cross her. The morning had started perfectly. She'd already issued 2 violation notices before 9 a.m. One for Mrs. Chen's aggressively pink garden gnome, and another for the Johnsons' trash cans being visible from the street for a full 37 minutes past pickup time. Karen sipped her fresh-pressed kale and spinach juice, savoring both the vitamins and her victories. That's when she spotted it. The Hendersons' backyard jacuzzi, which should have been pristine and compliant with HOA Regulation 47B regarding water feature maintenance standards, looked like a swamp. Green scum floated on the surface, and what appeared to be a family of frogs had taken up residence among the lily pads that definitely weren't supposed to be there. Absolutely unacceptable, Karen muttered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her juice glass. The Hendersons had been pushing boundaries lately, first with their unapproved wind chimes, then with that garishly colorful bird feeder. This was clearly an act of defiance. She marched across the perfectly edged lawns separating their properties, her sensible beige flats clicking against the regulation gray stepping stones. The Hendersons' backyard was empty, their sliding door closed. Perfect. She'd document this violation thoroughly, maybe even take a water sample to prove just how disgustingly non-compliant the jacuzzi had become. Karen climbed the 3 steps to the jacuzzi's edge, pulling out her phone to photograph the evidence. She leaned forward, trying to capture the perfect angle that would showcase the full extent of the Hendersons' negligence. The rotted wooden edge gave way. One moment Karen was righteously documenting violations. The next, she was flailing through the air, her sun hat flying off like a wayward frisbee. She crashed into the fetid water with a splash that would have been heard 3 houses away if anyone had been home to hear it. Karen surfaced, sputtering and gasping, her carefully styled hair now draped with algae like some demented sea creature. A frog, apparently as shocked as she was, leaped from her shoulder back into the murky depths. Her phone, she realized with growing horror, had followed her into the swamp. "Help!" she called out, but her voice cracked with embarrassment rather than genuine fear. Standing waist-deep in what felt like primordial soup, Karen looked around desperately. The jacuzzi's sides were too high and too slippery to climb out easily, especially with her beige pantsuit now weighing her down like concrete. She grabbed her juice glass, which had somehow survived the fall, and took a defiant sip. At least her morning vitamins wouldn't be wasted, even if her dignity had completely dissolved. That's when she heard the sirens. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was packed. Karen had called it ostensibly to address critical safety violations threatening property values, but everyone knew they were really there for the spectacle. Word of the Jacuzzi incident had spread through Willow Creek Estates like wildfire, and the residents were hungry for drama. Karen stood at the front of the community center, her backup power suit pressed to perfection, her backup clipboard at the ready. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, crafting the narrative that would transform her humiliation into her vindication. "Neighbors," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never met a regulation she didn't love. "What happened this morning was a wake-up call. The Henderson property has become a danger to our entire community." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In the third row, she spotted Sarah Chen sitting next to her mother, both wearing identical expressions of barely contained amusement. Behind them, Tommy Morrison had somehow managed to squeeze his off-duty bulk into a folding chair that looked ready to surrender. The structural integrity of the Jacuzzi infrastructure is so compromised that a simple inspection nearly resulted in serious injury, Karen continued, warming to her theme. The water quality is so poor that I've already contacted the health department about potential environmental hazards. You mean when you fell in trying to spy on us? The voice came from the back of the room. Jim Henderson stood up slowly, his wife beside him. Martha Henderson looked frail but determined, a colorful scarf wrapped around her head where her hair had been. The room fell silent. I wasn't spying, Karen replied, her voice tight. I was conducting a legitimate inspection of code violations. From inside our Jacuzzi. This time it was Martha who spoke, her voice weak but clear. Jim told me what you said about us being negligent. About us being a danger to the neighborhood. Karen felt every eye in the room focused on her. This wasn't going according to plan. Mrs. Henderson, I was simply what? Martha Henderson slowly made her way to the front of the room, her husband's arm supporting her. Simply deciding that your rules matter more than our lives. The room was so quiet Karen could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. You want to know why our Jacuzzi looks like a swamp? Martha continued. Because I've been in chemotherapy for 6 months. Because there are days when I can barely get out of bed, much less maintain pool chemicals to your specifications. Because my husband has been sleeping in hospital chairs and juggling 2 jobs to pay medical bills. Karen's carefully prepared speech crumbled in her throat. Every word she planned felt inadequate, every justification hollow. We got those violation notices, Martha said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a stack of Karen's precisely typed citations. Every single one. While I was throwing up from chemo, while Jim was researching experimental treatments, while we were praying I'd live long enough to see Christmas. She held up the notices. Incorrect mailbox positioning, unauthorized wind chimes, non-regulation bird feeder. The stack of papers fluttered to the floor like dying leaves. Do you know what those wind chimes are, Mrs. Middleton? They were a gift from my granddaughter. She said they'd help me remember she was thinking about me when I was too sick to see visitors. By noon, Karen had showered, changed into her backup power suit, and was already implementing Operation Reputation Recovery from her home office. The converted guest bedroom she transformed into HOA Command Central, complete with filing cabinets organized by violation type and a corkboard displaying aerial photos of every property in Willow Creek Estates. Her first call was to Gladys Pemberton, the neighborhood's unofficial gossip dispatcher and Karen's most reliable ally in the ongoing war for suburban supremacy. Gladys, I need you to spread the word about what happened this morning, Karen said, pacing in front of her wall-mounted whiteboard, where she tracked compliance issues with color-coded markers. But we're going to frame this correctly. Oh, honey, I already heard, Gladys began. What you heard was incomplete, Karen interrupted. What actually happened was that I risked my personal safety to investigate a serious health hazard that the Hendersons have allowed to fester in their backyard. That Jacuzzi isn't just non-compliant, Gladys. It's a breeding ground for disease. Karen could practically hear Gladys's eyebrows raising through the phone. Well, when you put it that way, exactly. I didn't fall into that swamp by accident. I was pushed by the rotting infrastructure of their negligence. This is about community safety, not personal embarrassment. After hanging up with Gladys, Karen pulled out her emergency laptop, waterproof case, naturally, and began drafting what would become known in Willow Creek Estates history as the Henderson Report. 17 pages of meticulously documented violations, complete with photographic evidence, thankfully backed up to the cloud before her phone's untimely demise, regulatory citations, and a detailed analysis of how the Henderson property had become a clear and present danger to neighborhood property values and resident health. But as she typed, Karen's fingers began to slow. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning her approach. The image of Tommy Morrison trying not to laugh, of Sarah Chen's barely concealed grin, kept flashing through her mind. When had she become the person everyone secretly hoped would fail? The doorbell rang, interrupting her brooding. Karen smoothed her fresh pantsuit and opened the door to find Jim Henderson standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Mrs. Middleton," he said quietly, "I heard what happened this morning. Are you all right?" Karen blinked. She prepared for anger, for defensiveness, for a confrontation about violations and fines. She hadn't prepared for genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, "though I do have some serious concerns about your property maintenance." "Ma'am, I know about the Jacuzzi," Jim interrupted gently. "My wife's been fighting cancer for the past 6 months. We've had other priorities. I know that's no excuse for letting things slide, but—" The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson. Cancer. She thought of all the violation notices, all the rigid enforcement, all the times she'd walked past their house and seen only infractions instead of people. "I didn't know," she whispered. "We've been trying to keep it private," Jim continued. "But I wanted you to know that I'll get the Jacuzzi cleaned up. And Mrs. Middleton, I'm real sorry you got hurt because of our negligence." After Jim left, Karen sat in her office staring at the Henderson report on her screen. 17 pages of righteous indignation suddenly felt like 17 pages of cruelty. She thought about Mrs. Henderson, fighting for her life while Karen documented the exact shade of pink in their garden gnome. But then her phone rang. It was Councilman Bradley, the man she'd been lobbying to get appointed to the city's Property Standards Committee. "Karen, I heard about your incident this morning." His voice was carefully neutral. "I have to ask, is this the kind of judgment we can expect if you're given a larger role in municipal governance?" Karen's jaw tightened. "Politics. Always politics." "Councilman Bradley," she said smoothly, "what happened this morning was the direct result of my commitment to community safety. I literally put myself in harm's way to protect our neighborhood from a health hazard. If that's not the kind of dedication you want on your committee, then perhaps we have different definitions of public service." After she hung up, Karen stared at her reflection in the dark computer screen. She'd just lied to protect her reputation, thrown the Hendersons under the bus while they were dealing with cancer, and somehow felt both justified and disgusted with herself. The question was, which feeling would win?